it's always a pleasure to be part of these discussions. I think for me, first things first, I want to thank Susan. Anytime someone mentions Audre Lorde and Paulo Freire in in the same conversation, that is the music of my heart, as I say. And in many ways, they should be required reading for all social justice actors within our city. I think first things first, my 10-year-old daughter asked me why I was asked to speak about poverty and not wealth. It was a great question, and I thought hard and fast about it for around two or 3 days. And I believe, as with many things that children say, it will inform my presentation moving forward. For me, I think we are the sum of our experiences and the places and spaces which we have inhabited, broken bread, loved, and laughed. All of these things shape and contour who we are. I worked in over 4 countries globally, leading community development projects and programs in poverty eradication, water and sanitation. That's toilets and wells for those who don't know. These experiences have shaped how I see the world, how I understand in terms of who lives and who dies, how people live, the dignity of life, the dignity and the indignity of death and dying. I think to tell a story, you always begin at the you always start at the beginning. I grew up in a single parent household in Toronto. I remember my mother working 2 jobs. She worked as a legal secretary with the government of Ontario from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then she worked as an aide in a long-term home from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So that's a 16-hour day. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Toronto above a laundromat. And when the laundry was closed during the winter, the heat was turned down just enough so that the pipes would not freeze. But the people living in those apartments, well, they were simply on their own. Oftentimes we slept on the floor in the kitchen with the oven on so that we would not be cold at night. And it was a pretty drafty apartment. But this is what we could afford. You know, I think statistically, we would have been classified as being housed. But it was not about actually the quality of the 4 walls that we had. It was the fact that we had a place. And I think we need to look at it as a point of what is the quality in terms of where people are living, and what is the dignity of that space. And I think, you know, I think the waiting lists in that time in Toronto community housing or subsidized housing, it was years long, right? But for many of us, this was not our lot in life. As many Black people knew, we were cautious, yes, yet overly optimistic and full of hope. We also knew that this was part of the immigrant narrative of coming up, or as Drake put it, starting from the bottom. Now we're here. My perspectives on poverty are shaped by all of these experiences. Seeing my mother work long hours, but yet not being able to go back to school, rent a better home, buy a house, buy a car, etc. in spite of her working hard. I worked in 4 countries globally and in Nunavut, where I've seen and experienced the color of people who are so often associated and fixed to ideas of poverty within our society, language, structure, and the imaginings of poverty. We had the idea and the notion that if we worked hard, that then we would simply be able to pull ourselves out of poverty. I find this interesting because this notion and onus and responsibility for this upward shift was placed on us, and not the systemic structures that had us in this cycle of poverty and inequality. This is why President Obama, in his acceptance speech, the first time he got elected, resonated with me on so many levels. When he said, he spoke about being born into poverty. and there's the idea and the Judeo-Christian notion and ethic of pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. But no one ever asks, what if you don't have boots? Okay, then you're simply on your own. It it wasn't for a lack of trying. We did all the things, worked hard, kept our noses clean, went to church, played sports, so on and so forth. But we could not break that cycle because we did not understand the structures that determined and fixed our place and space within society. Um, this there was a color associated with poverty in my neighborhood. Even though there are many white kids, black kids, and brown kids in my neighborhood, there was always, things always seemed a bit harder for us, and we could never put our finger on actually what that was. You know, moving forward, my family and I moved to London three years ago from Nunavut. I think I was shocked at the level of poverty and vulnerability that exists within this city. We simply have to do better. We need an open and honest conversation in this nation, in this province, and most importantly, in this city about poverty that is focused on solutions, in intelligence, creativity, justice, and synergy. We have a lot of creativity, imagination, and intelligence in this city that we need to tap into to create solutions to poverty. If we made it a priority, then people will be able to come up with magnificent programs and strategies that can provide solutions to the inequality that exists within our city. I think for me, let's stop looking at poverty as a problem in need of fixing. Let's be much more nuanced and look at the structures of inequality that govern our everyday life. Okay, we begin to put strength. I think part of this is that this is how we can begin to put strength and power to behind words. For example, climate change is the greatest challenge to our existence. But as a movement, we will not achieve sustainable change and transformation unless we take an integrated approach and come up with solutions to not only climate change, but anti-Black racism and poverty and injustice within our society and our communities at the same time. These issues are not isolated and do not exist in isolation. Everything is woven together in the intricate pattern of performance, actualization, misinformation, solution, broken promises, repeat. Performance, actualization, misinformation, solution, broken promises, repeat. But how do we break the cycle? Just as we have began to acknowledge that trauma is passed from generation to generation through blood memory or blood quantum. We must also view poverty within our society with the same lens. Poverty is a type of trauma that exists as blood memory in so many marginalized people. Working in malnutrition, which I have for many years, one of the things I really find interesting is that we only treated children under the age of 5, and the reason being is that we understood is if children experienced if they were stunted at the age of 5, experienced severe malnutrition, that this affected their cognitive reasoning for the rest of their lives, and it was irreversible. Okay, so studies have shown us that poverty in itself rewires the brain of developing and growing children, lowering resiliency and increased chances of a number of physical and emotional problems when they become adults. This is why we need to invest in eradicating poverty. So in many ways, the sins of today affect the generations of tomorrow. I know recently the London Community Foundation, through their study, came out, I think it was 70,000 people living in poverty in London. 1 in 4 children living in poverty. 30% of Indigenous children and youth living in poverty. These are unimaginable numbers. Okay, and unless we make those investments now, then we will pay later. We have relegated the eradication of poverty to the realm of the heart. Not-for-profits, shelters, food banks, sock drives, food drives, etc. All well-intentioned movements, but our hearts alone will not solve all this problem. We must use our minds, our intelligence, and our hands to solve poverty and eliminate the structures that maintain these cycles of poverty. You know, I think many of us, we've had that conversation about full employment and what does that look like. But it has to go together with a living wage, quality education. Quality education is key. As a person of color, as a black man, I've always known, ever since as a child, that education is the great equalizer. But in many ways, that itself has also been a fallacy. Okay, so in spite of the fact of there's countless many people that I've met who are overly educated, who still remain within that's cycle of underemployment and also poverty within our city. You know, I think one of the things is that when we talk about poverty, it's not just about material poverty. We have a poverty of imagination. We have a poverty of courage politically, and we have a spiritual poverty, and we also have a poverty of compassion across the board. We simply have to do better. We have to find solutions to not just the material aspects of it, but all of the other facets as well. It's more, I find it to be, it's about many things that are beyond the physical, but do we have the imagination? Do we have the tools, and do we have the language to engage problems on those levels? I don't know if anyone has ever read John Kennard Keyes. He's an economist from the 1930s, and in the 1930s, he spoke about and I quote, he says, the blind spots of capitalism are twofold: too much wealth, inequality, and not enough jobs with a living wage and full employment. So we have been talking about this since the 1930s. This is nothing new. These are not new things that we're talking about. So it's not just jobs for jobs' sakes. It's about jobs that are building infrastructure, teaching jobs, jobs that contribute to the public interest and common good within our society, jobs that build prosperity for 7 generations to come, right? And yes, government has a role, the private sector has a role, the not-for-profit, but we too, as individuals, have a role at the same time. You know, and I think, of course, I can go on, but and I think for me, I'd like to offer a solution in the time that I have left. When I worked on MDG projects, Millennium Development Goals in Nigeria, I think one of the things that was really amazing was that the UN created what was called MDG villages across the globe. So an MDG village was where all of the MDGs were actualized within one space. So all of them, right? So I would like to present that a solution is we need a SDG neighborhood here in London. So why? Studies have shown that the neighborhoods that you grow up in determine your success. So let's transform the narrative. Identify a neighborhood in the city, a few city blocks, and provide all the necessary resources for the families and individuals living in that neighborhood. Work with the private sector, government, social services, not-for-profits, communities of faith, and all social actors, right, to provide each and every necessary service for the members of that community. Economists have told us that every $1 spent on this kind of development saves saves $7 in institutional spending later, meaning policing, welfare, so on and so forth. Okay, this is the kind of bold investment that we need to eradicate poverty at the neighborhood level first. Not just providing services, but building equity within communities, reforming systems, policies, and practices. So making sure that teachers and schools and hospitals and community health centers and police and that there's a wraparound system around our early childhood education, food security, and so on and so forth. This is how we need bold ideas. We need to be unafraid. We need to be courageous to say, how can we change the systemic structures which exist? And that's by transforming our community one neighborhood at a time. So thank you.